Okay, it's 12 o'clock, so let's start. My name is Sjur. I'm the co-director of the Centre for Higher Education Futures at DPU, the Danish School of Education, Aarhus University. And it's an enormous pleasure and honor to be hosting Sjur Bergan with his talk, The University in Times of Democratic Regression, Combining the Global and the Local. And Sjur will be known to many of you. He was head of the Council of Europe's Education Department until February 2022, when he supposedly retired, but there was no sign of it. He's been very, very active. He was extremely active in that position, influential in the Bologna follow-up group and in the whole area of higher education policy making through several decades. Since he retired, supposedly retired, he's been publishing and working, and his latest book is European Higher Education, Social Responsibility and the Local Democratic Mission, which is published by Temple University Press. It's hot off the press. And Jens has just made a nice joke that if we're quick, we can buy it without tariffs. But Sjur has also arranged with Temple that participants in this seminar or this webinar are eligible for a discount. So this is wonderful. So we have a talk that is related to a book. And Sjur, it's a fantastic pleasure to welcome you here. So thank you very much. We're going to record this because some people can't join and were nevertheless interested. The chat is open and you're welcome to write any comments as Sjur progresses through the talk, and we'll pick them up at the end of the talk. But after the talk, there will also be time for further questions, and we'll use the chat for you to signal that you've got a question. And then my colleague Alex will help me steer the questions. So welcome, Sjur. I think you're going to talk for about 30, 35
Something
or so
like that.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so over to you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you very much to you, to Søren and Aarhus for this invitation. Thank you also very much for your kind words. The downside of that, of course, is that the best way to make people disappointed is to raise expectations, which I suspect you just did. But thank you very much. And I'd like to thank two other persons who I believe are in. One of them I can see. So thank you very much to Jens Jensen for establishing the connection with Aarhus. Jens and I have worked together in many fora over a long time. And thank you also very much to Ira Harkavy, who I believe is with us in spite of the time difference with the US. As Sue mentioned, the talk today will be based on the book, and Ira Harkavy was the one who challenged me to write the book, which is actually the first one in the series that he's editing. So I obviously will not explore the whole book, but we are in times of democratic regression. It's very obvious when you look at the news now, and it's just not just about Trump. It's about Trump, but it's about Europe also. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time going into what these challenges to the democracy are, but it may be useful to look at. It would be even better if I could move this. Okay, it might be useful at least to look at what these challenges actually mean to higher education and research, because there are some quite serious challenges. I think you've seen over a number of years increasing questioning of whether actually research is reliable and relevant. And it's not the question of just have a single research result, which, research is always up for discussion. That's part of the nature of academic exchange, but it's really a fundamental question of whether research does any good for humanity. And linked to that, of course, is a question of whether there's any point in basing our societal development, our societal decisions on academically based knowledge and understanding. That is a very serious challenge. It's a very serious challenge to society, but it's also obviously a very serious challenge to higher education and research. So most of us here today, I think, somehow belong to the academic community. So it's really something that we need to think about ourselves. We have seen attempts, and more than attempts, also to outlaw certain disciplines, certain academic disciplines. The obvious example from a European perspective, of course, is the outlawing of gender studies in Hungary. But we have seen some others also, and there are, very often allegations of biased teaching. Now, I'm not saying that all teaching is totally objective, nor maybe that it should be, and maybe biases someplace. But some of the people who make the allegations most loudly, and I'm thinking here, if you think in U.S. terms, of part of Trump supporters, are themselves advocates of a very very narrowly based teaching in higher education. And of course, higher education is and is seen as elite. So all of this comes into what the Council of Europe has often termed the backlash of democracy. We see a rise of populism, and Descartes' old saying of "I think, therefore I am." Sometimes you wonder if it's not being turned into "I feel, therefore I am." So this really leads to a challenge to higher education, where we have to show that we're useful. In a sense, there has been a similar development in the European higher education area with regard to fundamental values. We long thought, and the fundamental values of the European higher education area have been there from the very beginning. But for a long time, we thought we could take them for granted. And then we thought we could no longer take them for granted. In a similar way, I think that it has long been taken for granted that higher education, that universities, higher education institutions serve several useful purposes. And now we have to justify ourselves. And we must resist a couple of temptations in doing so. The first temptation that we need to resist, I think, is to say we need to show our importance solely in economic terms. We need to show that we're economically useful, and we need to show that this usefulness is immediate. Now, none of us, I hope, would deny that higher education is important also economically. But the point is, that's not all we do. And that's why higher education really needs to justify its existence, its usefulness, with relation to what, when I was still at the Council of Europe, we designated as the four major purposes of higher education. So obviously, preparation for the labor market. We're not saying this is not important. We're just saying it's not all there is to it. Preparation for life as active citizens in a democratic society. If we want our societies to be and to remain democratic, we cannot do that without citizens' involvement, participation. Personal development is a long-term purpose of education. It's just that we don't talk about it very much. It remains important. And as societies, we need both to develop and then to maintain a broad and advanced knowledge base. So when we as higher education people argue why we are important, it must be in relation to all of these purposes, which are reinforcing each other, not mutually exclusive. And of course, this relates to the democratic mission of higher education. And here we have a long-standing cooperation with a group of U.S. higher education institutions, again, coordinated by Ira Harkavy and the International Consortium for Higher Education it's a very long name. I always forget. Higher Education, Civic Responsibility, and Democracy, and more recently joined also by the International Association of Universities and the Organization of American States, and of course the Council of Europe. If you go back about a generation, and if you think of your old civics textbooks, for those of us who are old enough to have had civics textbooks in school, they thought of democracy largely in terms of institutions. So parliaments, city councils, law, typically the constitution, but also other elements, other kinds of laws, and the procedures, in other words, elections. All of these are important. But when the political changes occurred in Central and Eastern Europe around 1990, there was a naive belief, and certainly also including in the Council of Europe, that if you only got elections, if you only got new constitutions and laws, if we only got newly composed parliaments, we would have democracy. And then they discovered it wasn't quite that easy. Parliaments or institutions, laws, and elections will be democratic only if they can rely on a set of attitudes and behaviors that make them democratic in practice. Now, that might look like a circular definition, but it's nevertheless an important one. And of course, underlying that is also the fact that the climate of debate needs to be such that debate and disagreement, respectful debate, respectful disagreement is possible, and that also has to do with the culture of democracy. Now, how can universities then demonstrate their use? Well, maybe in a local context. Maybe in the local context is where the importance of universities of higher education is most immediately obvious, and also in relation to the right of purposes. And there are some elements that are worth underlining here. First of all, of course, all universities are located somewhere. If they're universities, there are some providers that are only online, but if they're universities, they're located somewhere. But they need to be of the community, not just in the community. They need to interact with the community. In the US, there's a movement called the anchor institutions, and anchored because universities are in the community and they stay there also when times get rough. So we need to work with, and not just in the community. That means relating to the local public authorities, local schools, but also civil society more broadly, and of course the business community. See how all together need to see how universities can be of use, and this needs to be done in consultation with the local community. And again, it's important that this cooperation be based on values. It needs to further democracy and inclusion. But it needs to develop broad competences, not just the narrow competences that are immediately useful. And motivation is important. You have people who have potential, but you need to mobilize that potential. Now, I will now show a number of examples taken from the book. I think I need to make the point in doing that these are just that. They are examples. And none of the institutions that are mentioned here do only what I mentioned them for. And there are other institutions that do the same thing. Now, the classical case, of course, is a university or higher education institutions helping local economic development. Very typically, think of, technological innovation, startups, and all this. This is very classical. And the example I mentioned in the book is the Jagiellonian University of Krakow, in part because it's an old traditional university that has really taken up this mission. But it also does not limit its economic development mission, if you want, to technology, medical and life sciences. Krakow has a rich cultural heritage. And the University Museum, the Collegium Maius, is actually one of the tourist attractions of the city. So they help to develop tourism, and of course, through their courses, but also through their day-to-day activities. So as you see here, also helping develop public policies to stimulate economic developments is an important task for universities. And of course, we cannot do that today without also having a sustainability as a dimension of this. Now, as a Nordic, of course, one of the things that comes to mind when you talk about the second category, the outreach, is its popularization. And actually, one of my examples in the book is the University of Iceland, which has a very extensive media presence, open days on campus, and really participates in public space, aiming at the public at large to underline the importance of academically based knowledge and understanding, and help develop general culture. Another example would be Åbo Academy, which is a Swedish-speaking university in Finland, which contributes strongly to a TV series simply called What Does Science Say? So if you look at also the movement of popular universities in Strasbourg, where I live, you have the Université Populaire, which presents a very broad range of courses, any topic imaginable, but many of them have to do with cultural topics, history, etc. And many of the classes are actually held at the University of Strasbourg. But then there is more targeted work. Work with children, young people, can be, and the University of Iceland has an activity that I found very charming, which is called the Teddy Hospital, where children can take their teddy bears to a hospital and see what happens, how the teddy bear would be treated if it were sick. The point, of course, is to demystify the hospital experience, because the children themselves may end up there at one time. And in this case, they'll hopefully be less scared. But there's also help with children, help children who struggle academically, motivate, engage children, not least from backgrounds where they would not necessarily aim for higher education. And volunteering is a key part of this experience. If you go to the Czech Republic, which is another set of examples in the book, to my knowledge, Olomouc, the Palacký University in Olomouc was the first Czech university to set up a volunteering center, and through that, students can coordinate, can engage with something like 25 different NGOs to do social services, teaching, and other kinds of volunteering work. Some of them directed at vulnerable group, obviously refugees. The University of Jaén, for example, is on a front line for refugees coming from the Middle East, and is doing great work, trying to raise awareness in the local community, which you might understand might be a little bit skeptical in view of the numbers. But you also have other vulnerable group in Hradec Králové, which is about 100 kilometers from Prague. They have a program called A Night Outdoors, where students spend a night with homeless people on the streets. Of course, the immediate benefit is that they help the homeless people, and the university engaged in this. The longer term benefit is hopefully that the students who go through this experience develop a long-term empathy and commitment to helping homeless people. More classic, obviously, is people who need different kinds of services like legal advice, dental service, etc., and can receive them for free or at low cost. Now, some local communities are sort of out of the ordinary, and I think now I skipped it. Yeah, so before we talk about the unusual local community, let's talk about the engaged universities. Because as you see in the previous slides, many of the universities we mentioned here are engaged. Now, an engaged university, at least in the UK and Irish sense, is something a bit more than that. It's really an institution where public engagement is part and parcel of the DNA of the identity of the university. So it's about the many ways in which the activities and benefits of higher education research can be shared with the public. Could be work with community centers and schools. It could be to give people an opportunity, and not least the motivation to qualify for higher education. Let me take one example that I found especially fascinating. But a bit more than 10 years ago, the Council of Europe had a conference at Queen's University, and part of the pre-conference, we had an opportunity to go to a community center. Now, the community center was located in Sandy Row. It's about 2 kilometers from the campus of Queen's. It's a working class Protestant area, and all of these labels are very significant in Northern Ireland. People from the community said, they walk past Queen's every day, but never dream about setting foot on campus. What Queen's then did, as under the leadership of our friend Tony Gallagher, who is also a long-time participant in the cooperation that we have under the Democratic Mission of Higher Education, was to contact community leaders, or they contacted him, and say, we need to motivate young people to aim for higher education and give them skills to do so. And we will not do that by sending in the Queen's professors. They would certainly be competent, but they would be very remote. They would not be role models that the students could relate to. So Queen sent in their own students. Some of these students came from similar background as the people in the Sandy Row community. All of them were just a few years older than the local youth. And they managed to motivate and say, if I can do it, you can do it. And to my knowledge, the Queen's today has several students from this local community. But as I said, some communities are out of the ordinary. When you think about local, what do you think about? Maybe a city, maybe your city, maybe your own neighborhood. And in many cases, this is, of course, what the local community is. But in some cases, it's more than that. The most extreme, in a positive sense, example I can think of is the University of Aegean, which is in the southeastern part of Greece. Now, Greece is, at least the southern part of it, is a country of islands. The University of Aegean is one university, but it has campuses on 5 islands, and it it serves even a larger area. So it needs to be coherent, it needs to be local, but it needs to be local in different ways. Now, if it's outsiders, we look at the map, we probably say, yes, these are all islands, fine, they're all alike. I'm sure that the locals are quite good in identifying what's specific to their own island, in the same way that we're all very good at identifying what is specific to our own local communities. So here you have a university serving locally, but extensively, and they do so by aiming at academic excellence and playing a role in developing their cultural heritage, but also in catering to the refugees. Then you have some neighboring communities which have quite serious social challenges. The University of Malta, for example, if you drive past the University of Malta, it looks quite nice. It almost looks like a fortress from the outside. If you go onto campus, it opens up. But if you go a few kilometers from there, you get to the harbor area in Malta and facing Valletta. And that is traditionally an area that is quite run down. So the University of Malta engages with the local community, which also has a fairly large immigrant community, and offers help, offers various kinds of contacts. But this needs to be organized also. And I found a particularly fascinating model at the University of San Marino. The University of San Marino, because I was lucky enough to be on a committee that looked at how the San Marino could best integrate into the Bologna process. Now, San Marino is not a big country. So distinguishing between what is local and what is national is not always easy. But they have something called a territorial pact, and that's a way of organizing cooperation between the university and the community. It's organized, it's established by law, it's chaired by the university, I think even by the rector of the university, and you have all economic, social, and other actors participating, developing activities together. They have, for example, an observatory in youth. They have obviously activities enhancing economic cooperation. So they do many of the things that other universities do, but they do it in a way that is quite well organized. And it could, I think, be a model also for universities that come from different kinds of background. And some, I mean, Europe, in my view, is a quite unique mixture of what makes us European, what we have in common, and what makes us Armenian, Danish, British, French, whatever, Greek, whatever. Some countries have, many European countries have the same balance nationally. So we have majority groups and we have minority groups and we have minority languages. I think Europe has something like 50 official languages, but certainly 250 languages spoken by different groups. Higher education can and should play an important role in maintaining and developing both minority cultures and languages. In the book, I have 3 examples, 2 of which are really sort of minority cultures and languages, but in very, very different contexts. In northern Scandinavia, you have the Sami, which is indigenous population. The numbers are up for debate because it's not entirely easy to define who is actually a Sami, but you're talking in the order of probably of 80,000 people maybe. And there is actually a specific institution in Northern Norway, which is a small institution, but it teaches in Sami only. It doesn't have a broad range of subjects. It does have subjects aimed that are particularly important to the Sami community. So obviously teacher training, teacher education, but it's important also here that this is not a museum. Minority cultures are not a museum. They're living cultures. They need to be developed in the same way as other cultures, and that was what higher education here, contributes to doing. The Åbo Academy University is very different in that sense. It's the Swedish-speaking population of Finland is a minority culture in a numerical sense. There's also a minority culture in the sense that the number of speakers is dropping very often as a result of mixed marriages. But historically, of course, the Swedish speakers in Finland were the dominant group. Not every member of the Swedish-speaking minority is obviously a part of the elite, but in former times, the elite was largely Swedish-speaking. And also, it is connected to a much broader Swedish-speaking culture, centered in Sweden. But it does have a distinct Finnish-Swedish identity, which the Åbo Academy helps develop by being also not very big, but nevertheless academically very solid and internationally oriented universities. The University of Malta, again, is different. I mean, Maltese is not a minority culture nor a minority language in Malta in any way, but it does coexist with a global culture and a global language, namely English. So the University of Malta sees itself as having a particular mission in maintaining Maltese, even while teaching most of its courses in English. Now, one of the challenges, of course, of doing case studies is not just to do the narrative, but to do the analysis. So if you look at some of the lessons that we can draw from all of this, I suggest that the first thing that needs to be done is awareness raising. It sounds easy. It is actually quite challenging because we know that the conflicts in our time are quite serious. So we need to raise awareness of the local democratic mission, and it needs to be a democratic mission, not just a local mission. within the academic community, but of course also within the local community. That means that people need to engage, but also means that leadership needs to engage. The local engagement, the local democratic mission needs to be a leadership issue at the university, but also in the local community. If the leadership of both do not give priority to this grassroots cooperation, grassroots initiative will have a harder time actually materializing, and it must be cooperation. There are two parties. There's a saying that says two to tango. This is very much the case also with in this situation. It needs to be a cooperation. The university needs to make clear what it has to offer. The local community needs to define its own needs, and then they need to meet and see, out of these two, what can we actually do together. And as we saw in the case of Queen's University, student involvement is important. Students are residents of the community. They're citizens of the community. They're in an age group that means that they can relate particularly well to certain groups in the local community, as we saw youth and school students. We need to recognize also that some of the benefits that higher education can offer are not immediate. That needs to be clear to the university, and they need to be open about this. But it's also something that the local community needs to understand. We need to do something now so that we have a better future, and we need to take account of the local circumstances, of course, which sometimes can be an excuse for doing nothing. That's not the point. We need to adapt. Now, if you want to learn lessons, you need to share the experience. And that's where the local, the European dimension of the local democratic mission comes in. When I was at the very end of my tenure in the Council of Europe, we talked about establishing a European platform for cooperation on the local democratic mission. There were three, elements of this. They said it's not about just the local mission, it's about the local democratic mission. So it needs to be values-based. And that obviously for the Council of Europe was a very important element. It needs to be place-based, identify with the place. And we need to look at what such a cooperation could actually do. The first step is simply to exchange and analyze the experience. And again, a case study is just not just a narrative. You need to be able to identify what in your own experience can be useful for others. And when you look at the experiences of others, you need to try to pick out what in the thing that the others have done can actually work in my circumstance. How can I learn? How can I not just adopt, but adapt it to my own circumstances? The second thing we believe is an important thing to do at European level is advocacy. We need to put the local democratic mission of higher education on the political agenda. It doesn't happen by itself. We know all the competing claims for attention in the political agenda. So we need advocates of this, both within the higher education community and in the different local communities. At your policies are in some ways developed and of course implemented locally. But I believe there can be such a thing as European policy development. We've seen an example of that in the European higher education area, where policies are basically developed at European level and then implemented nationally and within each institution. Something similar could happen here. And then, of course, we would need, such a cooperation could be well placed to undertake studies and work on specific issues. As I said, this is a proposal to the Council of Europe. I have the impression it's not really been taken out. So in a sense, it's perhaps also an idea that is up for grabs. Now, I'll end now by showing you the book. And then, so this is the cover, the photo, and again, thank you very much to Queen's University Belfast. This is Queen's University, the main campus. And if you would want to order it, this is how you can do it. As I said, participants here do have a discount if you use the discount code. I will stop the PowerPoint now, stop the presentation, but I'll try to put this information in the chat field, and hopefully we'll be able to, if there is interest in the presentation as such, also send it to participants. So I'll stop this. I'll try to copy the information and put it in the chat field. Thank you very much.